Hey everyone, welcome back to now this 9th part of this video tutorial series on editing audiobooks the Deyan audio way. So for this video, we're just going to take some time to edit another chapter and go over some details about timing. We went over that a little bit in the first video, but here we go. This is right from the editing specs that we have. Commas, 15s, maybe, sometimes, more commonly 25s, 35s, and 50s, things like that. Sentences, 50s sometimes, more commonly 65s, 75s, 80, 85s. Paragraphs, between 1 second and 1.5 seconds. So somewhere between 1 and 1.1 second will probably be your default, depending on the speed of the reader. And then you could even go farther, especially if you need drama, some extra drama between paragraphs. 1.15 to 1.25 works out great. 1.5 seconds for scene changes or time travel, flashbacks or leaps ahead. Between characters, we want to go less than whatever you're using for the paragraph. So 0.75 to 0.85 is great, if the narrator's naturally using a little bit more, you can maybe follow that, but this is a generally good guideline. Heated conversation, 0.6 to 0.65. There should be a reason. It shouldn't just be because it was originally rushed by the narrator. If so, you'd want to space that out. But if the conversation demands some fast talking, then you can get down a little lower. For interruption, 35 is the go-to, actually. I just say you can go up to 0.5 seconds if 30.35 sounds awkward. But a 35 often sounds great and just sounds like someone interrupting someone else, Between a big block of dialogue and a big block of narration, what I like to say is that there's a different mindset the listener has to be in to listen to a scene being performed for them by an actor versus a scene that's being described to them that they have to then imagine. So I like to give the listener a little moment to catch up with that change in headspace, and make it at least 1.1 seconds. This is not for any particular client. These are just things that generally have worked for many clients for us throughout the years when the client doesn't have anything else specific to say. Like oftentimes they have, rules about chapter breaks or, things like that. Tops and tails, of course. But this is something that's pretty universal. So we're going to go ahead and apply this now. I've got pretty much everything in the background turned off to try to maximize my speed here. I'm listening at, let's do more than 135, actually. Let's do 155. Yeah, I would actually listen probably 20% faster than that. But if you're new to listening to audio at high speed, this might be a little more listenable. We don't need this open, sorry. Okay. So yeah, let's give ourselves most of a second for pre-roll.
Wife. Their house was small.
Right, so we're right here. So I'm going to use control space to listen quickly.
Wife. Their house was small.
And right away, this kind of lip smack right here I don't like. If you could get rid of it like that.
Small. For the lumber to...
That'd be great, but it seems to still be pretty audible. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it like that.
House was small. For the lumber...
There we go.
For the lumber to build it had to be
A little squeak there.
For the lumber to build it...
Right, so I'm going to get rid of that.
For the lumber to build it had to be...
Great.
Build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made 1 room. And this...
Yeah, don't like that so much either. So I'm going to start needing to use my macros here. So let's set one up right now. Let's do 85 and 25. Highlight that, copy it, and use our Control F macro here.
1 room. And this room contained a rusty-looking cook stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table...
Now listen to this.
A cupboard for the dishes,
Yeah, there's some motion noise.
A cupboard for the dishes.
Now, I try to get rid of it like this.
Cupboard for the dishes. A cupboard for the dishes.
Yeah, that's actually pretty reasonable, maybe. It just gets rid of it enough.
Cupboard for the dishes.
Right, that sounds a little unrealistic, though.
Cupboard for the dishes. Cupboard for the dishes. Cupboard for the dishes.
Yeah, great. Okay. So that's one thing you can try to do to get rid of motion noise and not have to note that. If I wasn't able to delete that motion noise, I would have to make a pickup note about that.
Cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs.
Don't like that so much.
A table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed in one corner, and Dorothy a little bed in another corner.
Yeah, don't like that noise.
In another corner. There was no garret at all, and no cellar.
I don't like that one either.
Garret at all, and no cellar, except a small hole dug in the ground, called a cyclone cellar, where the
Don't like that noise.
cyclone cellar, where the family could go,
Called a cyclone cellar, where the
That's okay.
where the family could go in case one of those great whirlwinds arose.
Already noted that.
Whirlwinds arose, mighty enough to crush any building in its path. It was reached by a trap door in the middle of the floor, from which a ladder led down into the small, dark hole.
Okay, paragraph pause here. So just want to go ahead and edit that. We'll use our macro.
Dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a
Remember, we already fixed that.
gray prairie on every side.
Could maybe even...
great gray prairie on every side.
Yeah, let's try to shorten it up, actually.
Great gray prairie on every side. Great gray prairie on every side. Great gray prairie on every
Yeah, it's about as good as it gets.
Gray prairie on every side. Not a tree nor a house broke the broad sweep of flat country that...
The broad sweep of flat country that...
Right? Here's a great example of motion noise.
The broad sweep of flat country that...
We're not just going to be able to get rid of like that. So this, you would want to note this motion noise here.
The broad sweep of flat country that reached to the edge of the sky in all directions. The sun had baked the plowed land into a gray mass, with little cracks running through it.
running through it.
We can fix that.
Cracks running through it. Even
There we go. That's nasal, so not great, bud. So we'll help him out.
Running through it. Even the...
That's not perfect. I'm trying to avoid this noise.
running through it.
There we go.
Even the grass was not green, for the sun had burned the tops of the long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen everywhere. Once the house...
A little long there, so let's cut that down to an 85 with our macro. Yep.
Everywhere. Once the house had been painted, but the...
That's a little gross. Macro, 25.
had been painted, but the sun blistered the paint, and the rains washed it away. And now the house was as dull and gray as everything else.
And here we got a little chapter break here.
Everything else. As everything...
Help that out a little. Get rid of some of these things here.
As everything else.
There we go.
Everything else.
Okay.
When Aunt M
When Aunt M came to live, she was a young, pretty wife.
was a young, pretty wife.
Let's see if I can just edit this out here. Hold on.
Was a young, pretty wife.
Yeah.
Was a young, pretty wife.
Can do a lot of good
Was a young, pretty wife.
just with that editing there.
Young, pretty wife. The sun and wind had changed her too.
Yeah, it's a little noisy. I could do without that.
Changed her too. They had taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them a sober gray. They had
That's a little squeaky.
gray. They had taken the red from her cheeks and lips, and they were gray also. She was thin.
A little noise there I could do without.
Also. She was thin and gaunt, and never smiled now. When Dorothy
Some noise I don't like in there. Let's take it out.
smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter that she would scream and press her hands upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached
For Dorothy's
Right, these could use some help.
heart whenever Dorothy's merry...
Especially that right there.
heart whenever Dorothy's merry...
There we go.
Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears, and she still looked at the little girl with wonder.
No good.
The little girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at.
Paragraph pause. Drop a macro.
To laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night and did not know what joy was. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots, and he looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke.
Perfect paragraph, but let's edit that paragraph pause right there.
Rarely spoke. It was Toto that made
Toto. It was Toto that made...
Yeah, we might want to try to help that a little.
It was Toto that made...
Yeah.
It was Toto that made...
Yeah, that's fine.
It was Toto that...
There we go. Yeah.
Toto that made Dorothy laugh and saved her from growing as gray as her other surroundings. Toto was not gray. He was a
That's not great.
not gray. He was a little black dog with long silky hair and small black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly.
Okay. Paragraph pause there.
With him and
Yeah, that's nasal. Yep.
Played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle
Yep. I could deal with some more drama there. Watch.
were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the
not playing. Not playing. Playing.
Nope, that's,
Not playing.
there we go.
plane. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky, which was even grayer than usual.
Yep, stop that. There we go.
Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes.
I have to edit there. It's a take mark.
From the far north, they heard a low wail of wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming storm.
Oh, noise there. So get rid of that.
Coming storm. Coming storm. They're now
Oh,
coming storm.
There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned
From the south.
we can help that out.
From the south.
There we go.
south, and as they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly, Uncle Henry stood up.
Yeah, we need to help that pee out there. That's way too much.
Henry stood up.
Henry stood up.
Now, let's get rid of this noise first. And then see if we can...
Henry stood up.
Yeah, that might be acceptable if we do.
Henry
maybe.
stood up.
Yeah.
There's
okay.
a sign.
There's a cyclone coming in, he called to his wife.
Mm-hmm.
To his wife. I'll go look after the stock. Then he ran toward the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger close at hand.
Yeah, definitely want to edit there. Drop a macro.
Close at hand. Quick, Dorothy, she screamed. Run for the cellar.
Another paragraph pause there.
She screamed. Run for the cellar. Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and the girl started to get him. Aunt Em
A little noise there.
started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trapdoor in the floor and climbed down the ladder into the small, dark hole. Dorothy,
That needs a little help.
dark hole,
Dark hole.
dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt.
And started to follow her aunt.
Well, that sounds okay at normal speed.
Her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came
Nope, not good.
there came a great shriek from the wind, and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down
Oh, little squeak there.
She lost her footing.
We can try to shorten that up. Let's see what sounds squeaky. It's pretty much these waveforms here.
But she lost her footing.
Yep. Well, it doesn't sound natural though, does it? It's gonna have to have a little
But she
bit.
lost her footing. She lost her footing and
Yeah, that sounds at least natural, and it's just a tiny bit of squeak in there. This though is a nasal breath. Let's get rid of
lost her footing and lost her footing.
him.
She lost her footing and sat down.
There we go.
and sat down suddenly upon the floor.
Yep. Nasal breath right here.
Suddenly upon the floor. Then,
Yep, not good at all.
then, a strange thing happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air.
Slowly through the air.
Through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon.
Yeah, let's give it a nice pause here. Maybe even 125.
In a balloon. The north.
The north and south winds met where the house stood and made the exact center of the cyclone. In the middle
Yep, not great.
of the cyclone. In the middle of a cyclone, the air is generally still, but the
Not great.
great pressure of the wind on
But the great pressure of the wind.
Yeah, a few things going on here.
Great pressure of
Let's see if we can just shorten this up.
the great pressure of the wind. The great pressure of the wind on.
Yeah,
The great pressure of the wind on every side.
just makes it acceptable.
But the great pressure of the wind on every. But the great pressure of...
So this we'd probably just want to EQ. Something like that.
The great pressure of the wind on...
Can we get rid of any more of this? That's my question.
But the great pressure of the wind on... But the great pressure of the wind on... But the great pressure of the wind on...
Help.
But the great pressure of the wind on...
That's about as good as it gets.
The great pressure of the wind on every...
On every side of the house raised it up higher and higher until it was at the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained and was carried miles and miles away as easily as you could carry a feather.
That's all great. Sounds nice.
Carry a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few whirls around, and one other time when the...
around, and one other time...
Oh, that's fine.
And one other time when the house tipped badly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently, like a baby in a cradle. Toto...
Not good there.
In a cradle. Toto did not like it. He ran about the room, now here, now there, barking loudly, but Dorothy sat quiet, still on the floor, and waited to see what would happen. What would happen. Once Toto got too near the open trapdoor and fell in, and at first the little girl thought she had lost him, but soon she...
Lost him.
That's a little odd.
She had lost him, but soon...
There we go.
But soon she saw one of his ears sticking out through the hole. For the strong pressure of the air was keeping him up, so that he could...
Not great there.
Keeping him up, so that he could...
There we go.
So that he could not fall. She crept to the hole, caught Toto by the ear, and dragged him into the room again. Afterward...
Let's get rid of that.
The room again. Afterward, closing the trapdoor so that no more accidents could happen.
Hour after hour passed. Let's do a 150 there.
Accidents could happen.
Really breathy at the end sometimes.
This could happen.
There we go.
Hour
after hour passed away, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright. But she...
Not great. That's nasal.
Over her fright. But she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly all about her that she nearly became deaf. At first, she had wondered if she would be dashed into pieces when the house fell again. But as the...
Some lip smacks there.
house fell again, but as the hours...
House fell again, but as the... House fell again, but...
When the house fell again, but as the hours passed, and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying, and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last... Future would bring. At last, she crawled over to the swaying floor to her bed, and lay down upon it, and Toto followed, and lay down beside her. Down beside her. In spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon...
We could make this a little more dramatic, if you notice. It's the end of the or end of the chapter, and I like the things to be a little nicely paced there.
Wailing of the wind. Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell asleep.
Yeah, just make that have a nice little rhythm at the end.
Fell asleep.
Okay. Could cut that off too.
Fell asleep.
There we go. And there we go. That's our chapter 1. Right? All right. There we go. Sorry, it's not, quite as fast as I would actually be editing. I'd be listening a lot faster than this, probably. And the recording software that I've got on makes Pro Tools and Keyboard Maestro not respond as quickly as I'd like to. So both the actual Pro Tools actions and macros take a little longer than I'd like. But I think you can see there how when you get quick, the beginning of a book or the beginning of a chapter might take a little extra editing, especially if the actors just come back from a break. So you kind of have to lay in heavy at first. And then as they get into their groove, you can lay back and notice how I let a couple of paragraphs just go unedited. Short ones, though, There shouldn't be more than 4 or 5 sentences that go in a row unedited, probably. If you're doing that, you're doing a little too little, right? But, every 2 sentences or 3 sentences, probably For a decent narrator, there should be an edit in there, and hopefully that kind of gives an insight into what we're looking for to get rid of, and some quick ways to do it. I hope I moved my hand slowly enough you could tell what I was doing, and that you can take that and go even faster and listen faster at some point at least. All right.